if I use MCT oil powder, do I need to add butter also?
That's another great question.
That is a fantastic question.
So something about fats that are powdered. Any oil or anything you have to dry has to be dried onto something.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we've learned about ingredients. So one of the things that we did at KetoCon, like 2017, a long time ago, was I walked around to all the vendors, and if they had an MCT oil in their product, I asked them what their MCT was dried on. And most of them did not know what their MCT was dried on.
It's oil.
And so a lot of times they don't do it as much as they used to, but it's still the cheapest option is to dry it on maltodextrin or dextrose. And
glucose.
Yes, and that is that is sugar.
Yeah.
It's a starch, that turns into a sugar.
We have this page on our website, Powder Fats with Keto Chow and Rounding on Nutritional Label.
Yeah.
And it is important to note that, okay, there is butter powder, there's also MCT powder. Mm-hmm. Whenever you use a powdered carbohydrate, a powdered butter, the amount of carbohydrate is going to be higher for the same number of calories than you would get with the liquid. And a lot of that, that's because they are rounding, and so it may say 0 grams of carbs, mm-hmm. but it actually has quite a lot. For instance, here you've got regular butter. To get 1,500 calories would be less than what, a fifth of a gram?
Less than 1 carb.
Yeah. Whereas if you use butter powder, it would be 16, mm-hmm. and sweet cream powder would be 25.
And that's because the 0.4 whatever adds up. 0.4, 0.4,
Yeah.
0.4 equals
adds up pretty quickly.
Something else.
So
that's something we've learned too.
Yeah, and if the convenience of using a powdered fat mm-hmm. outweighs the issues, then by all means, go for it. Now, you don't need to use MCT powder. And in fact, in my own personal tests, unless I am studying for a test mm-hmm. or need my brain on fire with really high ketones, I don't ever use MCT oil, and I certainly don't use exogenous ketones because I don't need to treat a neurological condition, mm-hmm. so I don't see a reason for that. A good point is that you do need at least 10 grams of fat in Keto Chow in order to properly absorb the vitamins. So no matter what you do,
you want to have some fat.
Yeah, in your digestive system at the same time as Keto Chow. That means that you could have a little bit of coconut oil in a spoon, or some butter, or some, whatever. As long as it's in your digestive system at the same time, you'll be able to absorb the vitamins. And so you need that. You don't need any other fat with it.
Yep. So the answer to your question is, can you use powdered MCT oil with Keto Chow? Yes. You can.
Yep.
But we want you to make sure you know what you're doing by researching different things. Mm-hmm. Another thing that we wanted to say, our daughter, who has depression and has been fighting that for quite a number of years, uses MCT oil on occasion and exogenous ketones to help her function better. And so everybody has a different story. Everybody has a different reason. Just because Chris doesn't use MCT doesn't mean that you can't use MCT.
Because, my primary goal is to lose fat. Mm-hmm. And MCT and exogenous ketones do not aid in the loss mm-hmm. of fat.
Yep.
So.
But yet MCT and exogenous ketones do help with mental clarity.
Yes, they do.
So sometimes you just have to weigh what's most important for you at the time. Also, we want people to be able to buy what they can afford, right? And if you already have the MCT powder and you don't have any problems with it, definitely use it, because you've already paid for it. But you also have sunk cost bias, which if you feel like just because you bought it, you have to use it, you don't have to if you don't want to and you feel like it's not going to be good for you. If it's bad for you, get rid of it.
So is the MCT powder better than the oil? I would say no.
Oil, I think, is always going to be better than the powder.
Yes.
It won't taste as good. Some of the MCT powders are flavored.
Yeah, like they have strawberry
and
flavor.
So
and stuff like
that would be more palatable. But MCT oil by itself is a purer form, and it's gonna work better. But you'd have to try and see if she could tolerate it too. We put for Kate, we put MCT in her Keto Chow. We also do like a Zip Fizz with a ketone supplement and MCT oil in that, and she just downs the whole thing. So
yep. So as far as better, the MCT oil, the pure oil, will be the most effective.
Yes.
How about that?
But you do need to be careful with it because it also could go through you.
Ooh.
So you don't want to give her like 3 tablespoons or she'll just have diarrhea real fast and then she'll be unhappy.
The most you can have in any given meal is a tablespoon, and you have to work up to that.
Yeah.
Brenda says powdered is easier on the stomach, I think. I have personally experienced that if I'm having issues with, say, MCT oil, a powdered MCT oil, for whatever reason, is easier on my stomach, but I don't use MCT oil.
So why do you think that is? Is it because it has to break down and become liquid again, and so it takes a lot longer for your body to do that? Or
the additional fiber is feeding my gut bacteria?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So maybe don't have it on an empty stomach. That would be good too.
Aaron says, does anyone know how long liquid MCT oil lasts before it goes rancid?
I haven't had it go rancid yet. We've had some for a long time.
Okay, so really short. I'm going to keep this as short as I can.
Okay.
Saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat. What it's referring to, okay, fats, you have a carbon, 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 carbon in the chain with hydrogen hooked onto it, okay? And then you've got 3 of these that are joined with a glycerol. It's called a triglyceride. Okay, so we've got the basic structure, like long chain of carbons, hydrogens. If the chain of carbons is completely saturated, completely full of hydrogen, it is called a saturated fat.
Which would be butter, coconut oil.
Coconut oil, yeah. Now, all naturally occurring fats have a mixture of
lard,
of saturated, polyunsaturated, and monounsaturated.
Yeah, so they're not completely saturated,
right? Saturated fats tend to harden at room temperature. Now, that's not always the case, but anyway, MCT oil doesn't do that.
Typically, yeah.
Anyway, so that's a saturated fat. Monounsaturated, there's one spot in the chain where instead of having 2 hydrogens come off it, you're missing 2 of the hydrogens, and you've got a double bond with one carbon, well, 2 carbons.
So the carbon and carbon are next to each other?
Yeah. So in one spot, you've got 2 carbons hooked to each other.
So carbon, hydrogen all over here, and then carbon, carbon.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it tends to kink it. It makes it go a little bit crooked. With a polyunsaturated, have...
what was that?
That was monounsaturated.
Mono.
So there's
Mono
one
has
spot.
one broken spot.
Yeah. With polyunsaturated, there's multiple ones.
Okay,
and usually,
so it's like...
Yeah, and usually it's in like groups of 3. You've got omega-3, you've got omega-6, you've got omega-9. Those are polyunsaturated.
Okay.
Every place that there's a double bond, that's a weak point. And it's an opportunity for that to break.
And become oxidized.
And oxygen gets in there, and that smells like rancid oil. We identify that as bad. Okay, so saturated, very stable, doesn't oxidize. Bacon fat, because it's primarily a saturated fat, butter, primarily a saturated fat. That's why your grandma had a container of bacon grease under the sink with a cover over it, and she would just get it out. Did they refrigerate it? No, it didn't need to be refrigerated.
We don't refrigerate ours.
Our bacon fat? Absolutely not. So, and MCT oil is the same way. It is, depending on how it's made, it's a pure saturated fat. It should not oxidize. There's probably going to be a best by date on it, but you can, for all intents and purposes, ignore that?
Well, and the nice thing is, if it smells bad, you know, it's oxidized, right?
But I have used MCT oil that's like
MCT oil.
It's like 7 years old, and I'm just like, yeah, that's still fine.
It's good.